For those of you who either attended the first Equity Education Summit on August 14th of this year, or who have watched the recorded session, Learning and Leading for Equity, a conversation with Connecticut principals, you'll remember that even though we gained a great deal of insight into the work that these principals were doing at their schools, the hour flew by and we had just begun to scratch the surface of the work that they, along with their faculty, staff, parents, and students have been doing in their schools. So I'm thrilled this morning to tell you that 3 of the 4 principals and a couple of their staff members are available to continue to share with you the journey that they're on towards inclusive excellence. Once I introduce them to you, each principal will have approximately 20 minutes to share the work that they've been doing with their school communities to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion along a continuum of inclusive excellence. The 3 principals we have joining us today include, first of all, Joe Macrino. He's principal of Oswegatchie Elementary School in Waterford, Connecticut. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Sahana Smith. She's principal of Reed School, which is a pre-K school in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Welcome, Sahana.
Hi, Rosie. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And finally, Stafford Thomas, principal of Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut.
Perfect. Thank you.
So before we get started, I just want to remind those of you who are viewing our School Spotlight live to please use the Q&A feature to enter any questions you have for our 3 presenters. We have about 15 minutes to answer as many questions as we can at the end of this portion of the summit. And if you have any further questions for any of our 3 principals, we will share their contact information with you at the end of the presentation. And just one more thing before I turn this over to Stafford Thomas, who's going to start us off with the School Spotlight segment. I'm very, very excited to congratulate both Stafford and everyone at Staples High School for being named recently by Niche as the best public high school in Connecticut for the 3rd consecutive year. Congratulations, Stafford and Staples High School.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, and I know that I've got everybody's attention now, and you guys have to be doing something right at Staples High School. So we would like to have you share with us what's going on and all the outstanding work that you're doing as you move through the continuum of inclusive excellence. It's now my pleasure to introduce Principal Stafford Thomas again.
Hey, thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. If you're wondering who I am, the photo in the email for the conference was taken in, I believe it was May of 2020. That was my first year here at Staples. So it's only a couple of years ago, but it feels like decades ago. So I have aged since then. But what a tremendous morning, and I thank you all for joining. I had to laugh at Principal Kefele's discussion when he was referring to his time as a middle school principal and doing the schedule all summer. This is my 20th year as an administrator, and my first 3 years are in AP at the middle school level, and I do remember doing exactly that. So again, thank you so much. And today I just hope to share with you a perspective from one high school and my experience being now the 3rd year, albeit very unusual years here at Staples High School. So in the chat, I have shared a Google Doc. I just felt it was the easiest way for you to click back and forth or to use some of the material there as you see fit. But really, as we look at our pursuit of inclusive excellence, high school perspective, kind of broke it into 3 categories that I think have helped to guide us along the way here at Staples as we are, still in that pursuit and really just getting started. So the first one is the school-centered actions that make a school a more socially just place in which students can thrive. And the first 3 documents there again are things that you can easily do, but they do have a big impact, and I think in many ways can be a first step as on your road to being a more inclusive school. The first one is if you click on that, it's a new school year introduction ideas. And this is something that was created by teacher Kayla and assistant principal Chase and myself as a way to welcome students back actually this year. And you'll see through a couple of the 10 bullets there are ways that you'd introduce yourself with pronouns, have students introduce themselves instead of perhaps reading off of a list. There are a number of items there that you can use after the first day of school as well, like number 5, in terms of using gender neutral terms, again, making the students feel that that they have a voice and that it is truly a safe environment and space. One of the foci we have here is the classroom climate and how to improve that. Avoiding activities that split the class into males and females. Again, that can promote stereotypes, and also as you look at the achievement in certain classes between males and females, this is another way to combat that. Something that we'll get into a little bit later in terms of implicit bias is kind of making a checklist as a teacher for who you call on. We all have and fall into calling on certain students more than others. So having that checklist will make sure that you do kind of spread the wealth when asking questions. And another piece that is key, but can become when that uncomfortable silence comes up, if you're talking about an issue of race or something that may be in the media, that sometimes teachers may tend to look at a student that represents either that group or the topic that's taking place in the media. So that's something that when there is that uncomfortable silence, or sometimes you may just jump right into it, calling on that student to kind of be the voice for the group that you're discussing. That's something to also keep in mind because it can be a very uncomfortable situation for the student for a number of reasons. One of the the pieces that we saw here, especially during my first year, obviously the last 2 years have been anything but normal, but in the first year, I think this is probably true in most cases, sometimes issues that come up around race and gender that are insensitive take place either in a classroom or between friends or acquaintances. Students, maybe not knowing, in some cases, maybe not caring if it could have the intent to harm, but a lot of cases not knowing. And, that's something that, we define kind of as a microaggression. It's something that students certainly are more aware of, certainly in the last 5 years. Growing up, I wasn't quite sure, what they were. I didn't know the label for it, but it is something I'll go to a grocery store, and once a month I'll be dressed like this. Someone will ask me, where are the peas, or what aisle can I find this? And if I'm in a department store, it's 1 out of every 2 times. Again, those things are considered microaggressions. Again, not having a label for that, it was, confusing, at the time. Students that do know and understand that it is something that, is harmful and frustrating, it certainly builds up. And, that's something that when comments are made in class, it's important to stop and to address that and to make sure that the teacher's aware of that. So we've done a few things around some examples of microaggressions so that teachers are aware of what they are, because that can certainly carry on and build throughout the day where it's frustrating for students. But it's so important, and it's something we're trying to transition to, is now that you have these microaggressions, how can you make the system as a whole more inclusive? A couple of other points as you look at the Pride Day celebration and Juneteenth celebration. Those are both media articles, and I didn't post them to promote Staples. It was really looking at, we did not contact the media for these 2 events. And in both cases, a Pride Day celebration and Juneteenth, it was the first ever celebration of its kind on those 2 days last year. And the media kind of got wind that we were going to be having these celebrations through our emails, and probably parents in town that may have spread the word that they came and did 2 stories within a month on both of these celebrations. Again, these are, as I mentioned in some of the articles, and you'll see we had them located very similar to how the Hispanic Heritage Month celebration in Meriden was posted in main areas where everybody passes and can see. So the cafeteria hallways leading up to those areas where everyone will be able to see, to read, to experience. We had some giveaways, we had some announcements, and we also brought in for both the Pride celebration, Pride Day, and for Juneteenth, we incorporated that into our advisory in terms of letting students know what it is, because that's so important really for everyone to understand why we're having it and why it's important. Again, I say they're easy because they were organized and they're very successful days, and they don't take a whole lot of resources. We got a lot of donations, you're able to provide the rest. But it is something that I can't tell you the response from the teachers and students. Primarily for Pride Day, it was from the teachers, and just the joy and the comments unsolicited that were brought forward kind of in a unofficial straw poll. It was impressive to see that. For Juneteenth, it was obviously the first time that it was recognized as a national holiday, and that was something that was also students felt proud that it was something that was represented in the school, and they learned a lot from. So again, I think, as I said in one of those articles, hopefully in the future we won't have to have these celebrations, but we're certainly looking at making them an annual affair, because that representation we find to be so important, especially at the high school level, where students are certainly finding their voice. We'll be heading out into the world, and that kind of will jump into post-high school in a second. But the other piece is promoting social and just teaching. The first part was school-centered actions that make the school a more socially just place, and now looking at promoting social and just teaching. My first year, we had a couple of presentations, one from the Anti-Defamation League on brave spaces, and one from American University on courageous conversations. And the whole faculty took part in that, and they were a lot of exercises that were done during that professional development, and those are certainly important. However, one of the pieces that I found I wanted to add or piggyback and would have liked to have started with was kind of the blind spots and the implicit bias that we all carry for various topics, and understanding that it's there, because I think that's something that, since we all have an implicit bias, we can identify, and we're forced to kind of grapple with, okay, let me be more careful. What are some ways? Sometimes some loaded words, such as racist, may not so much turn people off, but they have an image in their mind of somebody else somewhere else, and it's certainly not who they are. And it's such a loaded word that it may not be the best way to start a conversation. So implicit bias is something that no one can deny, and if they do, you kind of take them through. There are a couple of videos here I find are always short and sweet. These were presented at faculty meetings, and again, having the brevity is key, but they also touch on a few key points, kind of like when you associate peanut butter and jelly, things of that nature that everybody can talk about and say, oh yes, I see that, from job interviews and randomly sending out emails to professors, and the names of the students that are reaching out to professors to ask about a program at the university can be tied to certain ethnic groups, and the level of response to the students based on whether they were perceived as white, Black, Indian, or Hispanic, Latino. And so it is amazing to kind of see some of those there. And again, these are short clips that we can go through. What that does, what I feel is that essentially it has people, take a break, start to look at any of the procedures, the processes they have. In this case, you may look at who you're calling on in class, the pronouns you use, things of that nature that were in the new school year introduction ideas. Those may be some areas that you can quickly pivot and make some changes in your classroom. And again, most of the time, the classroom is what the teacher can control, and it's also a place that we are looking to make safe. And with the advent of our advisory program, having multiple trusted adults is a goal that we are shooting for. And then if you look at UCLA, it's kind of a couple of short videos on how you counteract implicit bias. But certainly, looking at blind spots, holding students to high expectations, and establishing inclusive, formats and environments in the class is certainly a way for students to feel better about themselves and also to achieve. I think you probably saw a lot of articles about Roland Barthes, who recently passed, and his number one, impact or I would say a change factor for improving students' performance and how students feel in school is how adults interact with one another. And I think some of these conversations that you have in the faculty meeting, sometimes using some of these videos, obviously with some other examples. And if you can use any examples from the school, that's always the best way, because again, it kind of takes the person out from, oh, that's, happening somewhere else, that's other. Like, no, these are examples that are actually taking place right here. Now that we know, what can we do about that? And then finally, the last bullet that I have there is to expand school stakeholders' ability to promote justice within the school. And so something that we've just completed in terms of the professional development process, we haven't created an action plan yet, is a DEI study. We happen to use NYU, but there are a number of programs and resources out there to do a DEI study and many different ways to do it. This was something that the superintendent and the Board of Education helped to roll out. So it was K-12. But as you look at the study, and this is what we hope to find, is you have to kind of take inventory of where you are. And many of the surveys that you have for the state, that you typically do for the school year, doesn't give you enough detailed information to see where changes have to be made. Because a lot of times it's, well, what's the problem? The school is performing, what is the issue? And so many times what we measure are not tied to how our students are feeling necessarily. It is different from social emotional learning as well. But looking at some of the benefits from doing a diversity, equity, inclusion study, some areas that we're looking at are discipline referrals. That's going to talk about stakeholders. You can see there involves faculty and staff. You're looking at suspensions, that's more so impacting administration. IEPs, looking at labels, and that brings in PPS. If you look at level of classes, so anything from honors to, is it a A, B, or C level class? That's something that will bring in teachers and counselors. Is there access to all classes for all students? And if so, what are the channels? While you may say you do have access, any student can take any class that they would like. What are the procedures for doing that? And how well-versed are students and families in navigating those measures in order to access all of these classes? And so that also brings in school counselors. After school clubs, activities, a lot of that too, what drives all the schools in terms of start times and everything else, typically transportation. So that's a piece to put in a late bus or an early bus if you're having extra help in the morning, or clubs in the morning, or if they're after school. Most are, but some of you may have later start times where you're doing much of that in the morning. So that's another area that you want to look at, but that gets into transportation, which could also get into the Board of Ed as well as the budget, especially if you're looking at a DEI, either equity inclusion, equity instruction position. So that again leads to more support from the district on these topics, which I know many of our presenters have already touched upon, the importance of having that central office Board of Ed umbrella in order to kind of at least protect, but also to promote some of the changes necessary. Post-high school plans, again, from a high school level, looking at 4-year, 2-year career paths after school. Are we, in all of these, are we finding groups that are overrepresented? And this, any school, depending on the breakdown, Connecticut, as we know, is one of the most racially isolated states. in the country, but are you seeing an overrepresentation, underrepresentation of students? Finally, also looking at the curricula reflecting the population, that's something that you will hear from a number of students that they kind of wish that who they were reading, who they saw looked like them and looks like them now, not just traditional To Kill a Mockingbird or materials that are from the 50s and 60s, but what about current authors and philosophers that would interest students, and especially on topics that, while they're not new, how we are dealing with them, the understanding, as I mentioned, microaggressions before, there wasn't a label. I mean, I'm old at 45, but when I was a teenager, middle schooler, I wasn't aware of the label. You felt like something may not be right in what was said, but the key is, how do we then change these systems? And that's the big piece. It's a celebration, like I said, it's easy, but one of the important pieces of having those celebrations is really announcing to the school, to the community, that this group, they're here. They are part of us. We're having these celebrations, and that's vital, because it does show, like, okay, there's recognition. Now, how we move from that to equity inclusion, I think that's something that we're on that pursuit, looking at some of these key questions to the current practices that we have in place at the high school, and what the data tells us, and if so, looking at those final questions to answer, and that is based on what you understand. Are you addressing ways and opportunities that students can thrive? What actions offer necessary opportunities for students in such a world? And with a specific action or initiative, is it moving students closer to educational opportunity or further away from it? And I think that, again, going through a study, you'll find out kind of where you are, and you have a better understanding of what you've put in place, and be able to measure if it is working in the way that it was intended, or perhaps if it was not intended to impact students in such a way, but it is positively and negatively, either to spread it or to stop it, as we start to review what's best for all students. So that's hopefully, that's a lot in 20 minutes, but that's why I kind of gave you those resources, and those are actual things that we've used in faculty meetings to certainly help with the promotion of this, and having faculty members talk in small groups with departments at department meetings. We've also done, because again, smaller groups, it kind of mimics our advisory program. And so you can have conversations there where at least you have departments, and it's not always social studies or ELA that are on the front of this. You've got to put all departments, because they're all impacting our students equally on a daily basis. So that's what we're doing thus far, and we're looking forward to creating an action plan, hopefully by the end of this year, to move forward. So my 20 minutes is up, and I think I had the timer because I can go long, but thank you for listening.
Thank you, Stafford. You've given us so many resources and so many great things to think about. And I know high school principals and their schools are going to love the resources, the suggestions that you have given to them. And like I said, there's a reason why you have achieved for 3 years, the best public high school in Connecticut. So again, for anyone listening, Stafford, if you're a high school principal or someone working in a high school, Stafford would be an excellent resource for you. So thanks again for being here today. And we will probably hear more from you in a few minutes when we get to the Q&A. Next, I'd like to introduce Sahana Smith, who will share with you some exciting work and things that she and her faculty and staff have been engaged in as they continue along the continuum for inclusive excellence. And they've got a lot of great things going on down there at Reed School, pre-K through grade 8. So Sahana, take it away.
Thank you, Rosie. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see my screen? All right, so good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here to talk about how we're addressing equity at Reed School. I'm Sahana Smith, I'm the principal, and I'm joined with Kristen Lewis, our English language arts teacher in grade 8, and Diana Littman, our elementary academic support instructor. And you'll get to hear from both of them very shortly. So I'd like to just let you know a little bit about our school. We are a neighborhood school, grades pre-K through 8. We're also a Title I school, and you can just see a rough outline. We have many classroom teachers here, many non-certified staff. And if you take a look at our students, we have, as of yesterday, we had 715 students total. That number is just increasing every day. And there's just a breakdown, a racial and cultural breakdown of our student body. So I'd like to talk with you just a little about our journey. So we have been we've been practicing and promoting social and emotional learning for the past 7 years. I've been at Reed for 8 years. So 7 years ago, we started on this journey. We did work with the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and that was really a district initiative with our former superintendent, Fran Rabinowitz, who brought social and emotional learning and Yale to Bridgeport. So we've had the luxury of actually working very closely with some implementation teams years ago. And both Diana and Kristen are a part of our committees here at Reed that really transitioned also into restorative practices. The three of us, as well as others, did some training in restorative practices with Joanne Freiberg from the Connecticut State Department of Education. And we've been working on that at a school level, understanding those principles over the past, I would say, 3 or 4 years. This year, we actually have a person that started with us, and his title is Restorative Practices Specialist. And so he helps work with many of our students who are having some difficulties, either with peers or in the classroom setting. So he's been a great addition to our staff as well. We've also done some work with trauma through professional readings. We are continuing our work with equity. Diana and Kristen joined me for a training actually in the fall of 2019, literally just before the pandemic. And we went to a training in Hartford. It was several days long with the Connecticut Center for School Change. And we really got a lot out of that training. We actually learned the information about each other's, about our backgrounds and personal stories, things that we didn't know that we felt were so powerful to bring back to our staff and to bring to our students. Unfortunately, all of our work from that actual workshop got cut short because of COVID and the pandemic, and things have just taken a twist, as you can all relate, I'm sure. But if you just take a look at social emotional learning, restorative practices, trauma, equity, all of these things, all of these topics really do connect with one another. And so right now this year, actually started last spring, we started really taking a deep dive into culturally responsive teaching through professional readings. And I'm going to talk with you a little bit more about that next. And then just ongoing professional learning. Many years ago, I realized that it's just not helpful for me to stand in front of the staff during faculty meetings and to just talk. It's not helpful for me to just share information that I could share in an email. So we transformed our faculty meetings so that they really did function like professional learning sessions or professional learning opportunities. And so we've done a lot of professional readings over the years. And right now, in addition to culturally responsive teaching, we're also working on learning about acceleration versus remediation. And so I'll talk with you a little bit more about that, but I'd like for you to hear from my two teachers. So I'm going to have Kristen Lewis share just a story about equity from her perspective as a teacher here at Reed School, and then we'll hear from Diana Littman.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Smith. Hi, everybody. My name's Kristen Lewis. I'm an 8th grade teacher here at Reed School. And I just wanted to share an experience, personal experience I had dealing with equity. When the pandemic first hit back in March, we had as a whole school a total of 769 students at the time. when we went home for the pandemic on March 12th, we only had 270 working devices for the whole school, which left 475 kids without a device to go remote learning. Having friends teaching in districts, surrounding districts, many of them were able to hit the ground running with remote learning the next day or the very next week, whereas we didn't have those resources to give our kids what they needed. We did try doing packets for a little while, sent them home for like a 2-week period. However, we all know that you can't really teach a child through a packet for 2 weeks. By the time basically Bridgeport did get up and running, we were able to get some devices together. We came in, packaged up what we did have to send home. It was almost a whole month that our kids had lost out on learning. It was April 20th then that Bridgeport Public launched remote learning. And so therefore it was about a month that they had missed out. Later, a few months later, my students were graduating 8th grade to head to high school, and you know, it really was eye-opening to me how kind of behind they were in comparison and sending them out into high school simply because of the things that they didn't have to continue to try to teach and learn and be successful like the other kids, you know, in other districts. So that was very eye-opening and definitely something that has opened our perspective. Like there's been a lot of things to provide or that we try to provide the kids that they don't necessarily have here. But this was definitely really eye-opening and something that we still continue to try to figure out how to close that gap so our kids have the same experience. So that was my experience. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Ms. Littman so she can share with you.
Okay, hi, I am Diana Littman. Obviously, I'm not Sahana Smith, as my screen does say. We had some technical difficulties, but I'm a former second grade teacher. This year, I took a new role as our elementary academic support instructor. And so I have a totally different lens this year. And I get the opportunity to see equity being introduced to students in various classrooms in the kindergarten to 3rd grade level, so the elementary level. I see students accepting others' unique differences, understanding that everyone needs something different to be successful. And so this graphic that's on the screen right now is something that we've seen here at Reed School in several different capacities. I think we first saw it last spring. Mr. Testani, our superintendent, had Dr. Derek Gray come and present to us, obviously virtually. And he put this graphic on the screen and asked what we, you know, how we interpreted it. And so it's really interesting being able to see this exact thing play out in the classrooms, you know, the difference between inequality, equity, equality, and justice. And so just yesterday, I happened to be in a 2nd grade classroom, one of my current colleague, but former grade level partners. And a student was given the option to use flexible seating and a tool. They were having a hard time completing a task. And so he was taking a little break because he just couldn't complete what he needed to complete. And another student saw this happening and said, Ms. Savov, can I do that? And she said, remember, we've talked about that everybody needs something different to be successful. And she said, do you remember that? And the student said, yes. And she said, and aren't you already succeeding without those tools? And the little girl said, yes. And so I was really impressed by that because it just goes to show that those conversations have already taken place in that classroom. And so I actually followed up with the teacher this morning and told her a little bit about today's conference. And she told me that at the beginning of the year, she has a whole lesson about, you know, the word fairness and actually even the word equity. And I was really impressed. And so that's just something that really stood out to me. And I think it also lends itself to what Ms. Smith was talking about before, which is acceleration. I think it leads to the ability to do acceleration. And this summer, Ms. Smith and I attended an acceleration workshop with the Connecticut Center for School Change. And I think so many times teachers have the mindset that we can't do accelerated learning. We have to remediate. We have to, you know, kind of take a step back, but it's so not true. If we just teach our students and our teachers that everybody just needs a little something different, but can still succeed, then we can do great work.
Great. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Kristen. So let's see if I can get, all right. So I mentioned to you that we are studying culturally responsive teaching and the brain. This is actually our book study for the school year. We've outlined how we're going to progress through it. We started in the spring and some district initiatives got in the way and we had to put it on pause. So we picked it back up in September. And you know, my staff has heard me talk about this book at length. I believe that it should be mandatory reading for all educators. So if this is a book that you're not yet familiar with, I strongly encourage you to get this book. You can get it on Kindle. You can get it, you know, in the actual book form. I have it with me now. You can also listen to it on Audible or some other audio book. But it actually combines all of the most significant research on how children learn. It connects all the best research. It even contains like numerous book suggestions, articles, and resources. At the end of each chapter, it's called Going Deeper. So, I mean, I think it would take years to go through this book and then all of the suggested articles and books. It's definitely a never-ending, ongoing learning process. And here you can just see some other topics that are addressed in this book: brain science, science of learning, social and emotional learning, building relationships. And she talks about this care and push, which I think that Principal Kafele was talking about also this morning, about showing that you care for students, but also that you care for them enough that you're going to push them so that they're actually learning and push them to the next level. She also goes in detail about reframing errors as information, that mistakes are not bad. We learn from our mistakes, and pointing out a mistake and helping a student understand why they made a mistake, why this error occurred, actually helps in their learning process. And then working in cooperative groups is another major topic. I wanted to just talk with you about this cultural dimensions index. During our professional development last month in September, when we got together as a whole school. And let me actually just stop to say, we are a school that runs on 2 schedules. So we have one schedule for grades 5 through 8, which is considered our middle school. They start 40 minutes earlier than our elementary school, which is pre-K through 4th grade. And so we don't always have an opportunity to meet as a whole group. This year, our meetings were structured a little differently. So when you hear me say like we had a chance to meet as a whole group, the last time we were able to do that was in September, and we do have another opportunity coming up next week. But basically, in the book, in Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, Zaretta Hammond, the author, talks about cultural archetypes and saying that they're really important for the culturally responsive teacher to understand. So I wanted to give you an example of just very briefly what we were discussing in small groups during our last meeting. So you have in this cultural dimensions index, there's a scale, and at the high end of the scale, you have extremely individualist cultures. So those cultures where the people are self-oriented, individual effort is favored, especially in learning. It's about your individual effort and competition over cooperation. Now, on the lower end of this scale, you have more collectivist cultures. And so there's a group orientation as opposed to a self-oriented mentality. Relationships are essential to learning, and cooperation over competition. And so in this particular scale, which is located in the book, it's actually in chapter 2, United States is at the top of the scale. It has the highest index number of 91. And this is important because we are all living in the United States. We're all educators here in the United States. But when you take a look at the countries that our students come from and the cultures that they represent, Mexico rates at 30 on this scale. So think about the difference between 91 and 30. And then Ecuador, we have many students from Ecuador. They're in the single digit. They're rated at an 8. So they are actually very highly collectivist. Their relationships are extremely important to their culture when it comes to learning. Haiti I listed because Haiti is not even on our chart, on this index. We have a significant Haitian population here at Reed, and Haiti, their number is not even a part of this index. And so that just really led to a lot of different conversations the last time that we were together. And I just wanted to give you an example of why, just how this book really does help to inform and give us a lens that we're able to use as we're interacting with each other, adults to adults, and also with our students. Let's see. Okay, so here is an example of a personal cultural assessment, and we used this in August. I used this during one of our back to school sessions, and it's really just, it's a cultural assessment. You can actually Google cultural assessment, and there are lots of them out there. Diane and I did some work with UConn in June, and I'm continuing in this work with them. It's a year-long collaboration that combines social and emotional learning and leadership. And so this actual personal cultural assessment came from UConn, but it helps us use ourselves as a reference, so that if we understand ourselves and where we came from, it helps us learn about and understand others. So I just wanted to give you an example. It's taking a look at, so it's causing you to think about your age and generational influences, your religion, spiritual orientation, your socioeconomic status, indigenous heritage, your gender. And there's a few more questions that go along with this, but it's basically causing you to wonder and to discuss with others, how might you have experienced privilege associated with different identities. And so that's just been a helpful tool that we will come back to again this year, to help frame our thinking as we continue to work through culturally responsive teaching. And so I talked with you about how during our faculty meetings, I really do try to use them as opportunities for professional learning. And there's this site, I'm not sure if any of you out there are familiar with it. It's the School Reform Initiative. And if you go to this site, you will find hundreds of protocols, and protocols are just so powerful because we use them as a professional learning community here at Reed. So as we're learning about culturally responsive teaching, as we're reading about trauma, as we're continuing our practice with social and emotional learning, we have different protocols that we use so that they actually help to frame our discussion, and it gets us thinking and it gets us talking. And the very nice thing about using these protocols is that teachers can actually use them with their students. So we practice using them as adults. And then, I say to them, please consider trying a version of this. For some, in 8th grade and 7th grade, they can take a protocol and do it exactly as it's outlined. In 3rd grade, they may have to do some tweaks to it, but it definitely is a great tool for educators, again, for adult learning and for working with students because of the opportunities that they lend for discussion and collaboration. So here's an example. We actually just did this one yesterday, text rendering experience. So we were reading an article about acceleration versus remediation. And what I'd like to do is actually come out of this PowerPoint and just give you an example of how I incorporated this yesterday. I have found definitely since the pandemic, because we're wearing masks when we're all together in a large group, people have been a little less inclined to just volunteer to share. So we, we'll go through it as an example, we'll go through the text rendering experience. And then at the end, I will say, who would like to share and tell us what you discussed in your group or what was your takeaway? And sometimes it takes a while. No one wants to share. So I decided to try something different yesterday. And I'm going to pull that up. Let's see. Oops, that's my last slide there. Ignore that slide. So what I did was we use Microsoft Office suite for in Bridgeport Public Schools. And so this is actually called Microsoft Forms. And it's a survey. So I took those questions that you just saw on the slide, and each group had to then place their response type these into the boxes. And then what we did is we took a look at everyone's response at the end of the 30-minute window that was allotted. And this again was their reflections on reading this article about acceleration versus remediation. And I did actually find that people were very interested to see what other groups had to share, but it took that pressure off of them needing to talk through their mask. I kind of showed this on the screen and did the talking, but if you can see, I'm just going to read one sentence. So the first part said, identify a sentence. Every member of the group identifies a sentence that they felt was particularly significant. So just one of the sentences says, denying students access to grade level work, even with the best intentions, often causes them to fall further behind. And so the group wanted to pick that as one of their sentences. There was a phrase, accelerate, don't remediate. And another phrase that came right from the article, school systems should make learning acceleration the foundation.
So give that a stir, let that sit for about 20 minutes.
Each person had to share a word. The words that they chose were foundation, clear vision, and implemented. And then just in reflecting on, any new insights that they gained, they had two. They said that learning acceleration is the term for the teaching approach that grade 5 is implementing. So this was the 5th grade team. And the second thing they said, that helping kids make growth and achieve their own personalized goal. It's also about overcoming setbacks that have accumulated over the past couple of years. And so the takeaway for me, and what I'm hoping will be the takeaway for my teachers, is that as we continue to read and learn about acceleration as a practice and something that we're going to be actively implementing, I'm hoping that they come to see the connection with culturally responsive teaching, because acceleration is a part of culturally responsive teaching, and it is definitely something that is outlined in culturally responsive teaching in the brain. So I'm just going to go back to, can you guys see my over slide? This is actually the very last thing I wanted to share. So we're starting a book club. And I don't know if you've heard about this book by Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You? And it's really about trauma, resilience, and healing. And actually, I finished the book, and it was just a book that I couldn't put down. And it made me think so much about working with our children in schools. It made me think about working and interacting with adults, whether it's teachers that work here at our school, families, parents who may be going through a crisis or who may not be exhibiting their best self for a day or for an exchange. This book really helps to reframe how you view yourself and the world, quite honestly. And so Diana's also just finished the book, and I've been waiting to discuss it with her, but we're holding off because I started a book club. Kristen has just started the book. And so we have, I'm just in the process of ordering books for all of the staff members who have agreed to join it. And so we'll be doing that book club over about 3 sessions. We're doing it as a virtual using chat and we'll be doing a couple of interesting ways of connecting. But again, my hope is that through this virtual book club, that they will begin to see the connections with all of the other professional learning that we've been focused on. And so I think I've probably used up my time. So I'm going to end it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sahana. Wonderful presentation along with Kristen and Diana. Thank you for joining us as well today. Your examples from the work that you're doing at your school, the resources that you shared with everyone for your professional development, I think are awesome, along with the tools for reframing your own thinking. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And I know we have at least one question for you when we come back, Sahana, but I want to get on with our last presentation by Joe Macrino from Oswegatchie Elementary School in Waterford, Connecticut. He and his school community are also deeply committed and actively engaged in the development and implementation of some outstanding and highly effective practices as they move along the continuum of inclusive excellence. So here to tell you more about what's going on at Oswegatchie School is Joe Macrino. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Rosie, and hello, friends. I'm Joe Macrino. I am the principal of Oswegatchie Elementary School in Waterford, Connecticut, in southeastern Connecticut. We are a school of about 325 students, pre-K through 5. I'm joined by my equity committee superheroes or superheroines, Allie Gallus, Mary Childs, and Lynn Castelpoggi. So you can all pop on and give a quick wave. So let's get right into it. I am no expert. We are no experts, but we're working hard to make sure that every kid, adult, anybody that walks through our doors has an equitable experience. Our journey is a cycle. It's not a path. There is no finish line here. So before we get into what my awesome teachers are doing, I just want you to picture the flywheel in which I'm operating under right now. Introspection, going into discussion, going into implementation. Our equity committee is about 2 years old, and we're going to talk today about from intention moving into impact, specifically what we're doing right now after a year of hardcore discussion, introspection, reflection, and reading and research, and what does that look like in the classroom. Just to give you some background as to where the foundations we're building off of, some of the core text resources that we started our journey on were around courageous conversations as a school, and this book is anti-racist. There's been many, many other titles since then. Mary is going to let us know about our most recent and the work they did over the summer. And I'm going to go back to something that stuck with me about what Sarhana said. As an administrator, you have to find, and I hope you're lucky enough to find, a core group of people, of confidants that are willing to be brave enough to take up this work. The people that are with me today really led this initiative at my school. It's a very organic, informal approach. We have great intentions. We want to see if we can make an impact. And without further ado, I'm going to let my friend share the work that we've been doing both as a district and as a building. So Mary, who is a special education teacher, Lynn, who teaches 5th grade, and Allie, who teaches 4th grade, are going to share a little bit of our current work. So Mary, without further ado, please.
Thank you, Joe. So our group going into the spring of last school year kind of put our thoughts together and came up with some ideas for what book we wanted to read through the summer kind of next for our personal development, our professional thinking. And we selected the book Everyday Anti-Racism, and that is a compilation of essays that we kind of assigned ourselves throughout the summer, and then every 2 weeks we met and discussed these essays and around what were some of the concepts, what were the ideas, what were our takeaways, and we shared them in kind of a virtual Zoom session throughout the summer. Our group was pretty flexible. If people could join us, that was great. And if they couldn't, then they missed a week or two. But we left the door open for whoever wanted to participate and read along with us. Thanks to our school-based parent group, we were able to get books for everyone who wanted to participate. And after each section, we had a place where if people wanted to put their reflections in a Google Classroom or a Google Doc, we could kind of listen and think about each other's notes and takeaways. So based on our reading, we were able to then come up with ideas and ways to positively impact our district. One of the units was on like how we use our district, our record keeping and some of our practices. So our group made a list of questions and asked central office to make some changes. And those were received well, thankfully. And so that's positive. Just through our discussions, we were able to name some of our next steps and what our actions as teachers in a classroom could be. And that's what led us into this fall.
And before I jump to Lynn, I wanted to, Mary, thank you. Just to a specific point to what Mary's and her teams worked at over the summer. So for example, you know, our initial focus was race, but as we went down that path, that started to bleed over into all underrepresented populations. So just some specifics about Mary was talking about. We looked at some of our documents that a lot of them had said mother, father, and we know that is not all families right now. We took a look at our student handbooks, and we took a look at dress code, and we were blown away to see that there was so many almost punitive measures toward females, or fashion-based rules that solely focused on females. Once you start pulling away those layers, it just becomes so apparent that there's a lot of work to do, and it can look overwhelming, but that's a great place to start. So then the next part of our work was we've had some rich discussions. We will continue to have rich discussions, but when does it start to positively impact our classrooms? We're very lucky to have a partnership with Linda Darcy, who is our equity partnership liaison with our RESC at Learn. So we wanted to take a look at upcoming units and take a look at adjust the volumes of perspectives. Is everybody being considered in upcoming units of study? It was a simple practice, but it reaped great rewards. We called in, it was a conference room. We had Linda Darcy, our literacy coach, and these educators right here to take a look at upcoming units and how we can build critical consciousness. How do we make sure that these are culturally responsive units and that all voices are being heard? Lynn, representing 5th grade, why don't you jump in and let us know the work that you're leading for your grade level?
Okay, thank you, Joe. Hi, I'm Lynn. At this recent meeting with Darcy, we were doing a curriculum equity review, and it was really about 45 minutes. So it's hard to make change in 45 minutes, but the cool thing is that you can make change. And I love that what I got out of that too is that you just put a few people in a room that need to change something and you can make something happen. And that really inspired me. So we had the goal of reviewing one unit, and we picked our social studies unit, and we've honed in on immigration. And up until now, we focused on European immigrants only coming through Ellis Island. It makes sense sort of because we're on the East Coast, but then we have to realize that we are one country and a whole world, and we have a lot of other things to consider. So our new focus is going to be that we are a nation of immigrants, and the US story is a story of migration. And a new focus question would be, why would someone leave their home forever? We also talked about Angel Island, which is primarily Asian immigrants coming to the United States from the West Coast. There were some other countries as well, but primarily Asian Americans. And in digging deeper now, I'm finding out a lot more about the Chinese Exclusion Act, which I won't get into right now, but it's so interesting. As Joe said, you just uncover, it's like an onion, you keep on peeling back and you learn a lot more about what has happened in our history that I was never taught. So we also discussed at great length that African Americans were part of a forced migration and they were an enslaved people. And that we use the term enslaved people, not slaves, because these people were stolen from their lives, where they were doctors, inventors, teachers, farmers. They had occupations. So it's, they're enslaved people, not slaves. So now our current work is, so we could, okay, we need to make some changes. So now we're gathering primary resources to include multiple perspectives beyond the European experience. And we're trying to find celebration stories, not just the sad ones that bring pity toward cultures that had a tough time, but what good has come out of it. And let's see. We're choosing read alouds with different perspectives, and we don't want to just pick up the old standbys that we've been using year after year just because there's the curriculum and here you go and you put it in front of the kids. We're going to be very purposeful in what we choose, and we're going to make sure we're not redundant. And so the big takeaways I took from this meeting was include the story of West Coast migration. African Americans were part of a forced migration, and African Americans were an enslaved people, not slaves. And this conversation was very hopeful, and we are all super excited. You can tell I'm still excited about it. And we're very energized about our work. And thinking about overhauling a curriculum is super overwhelming. But in 45 minutes, I think we made a big difference. And just starting the conversation begins to open your eyes wider. And once your eyes are open, you can see things you didn't see before. And it's really easy, even on a daily basis, to seep in diverse voices into your units of study.
Thank you, Lynn. It's breadcrumbs. It's just to get us to the next point. And part of that is maintaining momentum and keeping these conversations going and stopping every couple of weeks, even though it's difficult to find sub coverage, especially now. You principals probably know what I'm talking about, but we have to do the work. We have to make the time. And Allie is going to share with our 4th grade experience and some very interesting numbers that she was able to cull in her work.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. We focus, like Lynn said, on social studies as well. In 4th grade, we have a large focus on Native American, whether it be culture, history, and geography. And being from such a rich area with these opportunities right nearby, we want to tap into our resources and push beyond the single story. And we are receiving a grant or working to receive a grant with the Mohegan tribe this year. And so we're really excited to partner with them, take a look at primary sources, get to experience their museum, but also work with tribal members for a more accurate representation of the Native American experience. Our first social studies unit is how does where you live affect how you live? And so we're going to look more into the culture of not only in the past, but also present, and looking into that. The other unit is has to do with the colonist, and the title of that unit, or that big essential question, is how did the friendship between the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims go so wrong? And while we feel like we teach more of the truth behind of what happened and we don't sugarcoat it, the students get to find out what really happened. We started to realize our primary sources were from William Bradford, and our primary sources were coming still from that single story. So last year, we as a district had the opportunity to learn about critical consciousness from the Sanford model. And so we are using not only as teachers professionally critical consciousness when planning, but also getting the students to think critically and thinking whose perspectives are reflected, whose are absent, who's telling this story, whose voices are missing and why are they missing? Why is this problematic? What resources can we look for in order to find people telling their own stories? And so we want students to be able to think critically, but also, like I said, push beyond that single story. Additionally, from social studies, also we're working in our ELA unit as well. And our first unit is a realistic fiction unit that focuses on characters. So before starting the unit, I went to pull books and I did a informal audit. And so I pulled realistic fiction books from levels M through S, and I had about 20 books there. And within those 20 books, there were 2 characters that weren't white. All the other characters were white, and every single author was white except for one. So that obviously is very problematic, considering we want our students to have mirrors and windows. And so then I spent some time doing some research, finding what else is out there, which these books do exist. And so I was really happy to find a plethora of different options. And I had compiled, I'm going to see if I can put this in the chat. I compiled a list of books that I'm going to share with in the district, so that when we place our order next year, that we are more intentional and we are not just using what we've already used, but looking at stories from all different cultures and backgrounds, and also authors that are telling stories from their voice is another important thing that we're looking into. So we're making, I think, good progress, and thank you to our team for their support. It's been great. So thank
Thanks,
you.
Ally. So in summary, it's what seems like to us at points, small little changes. You know, we're all very hungry and we just want to flip the switch and make sure that there are equitable resources or an equitable experience for everybody. It's going to take time for us to do it right with greater confidence. We're always going to be able to do better, but we're really proud of this work right now, and anybody can do it. You just need some committed partners, and you need, like Lynn said, we moved some mountains in 45 minutes. Now, that took a lot of planning ahead of time and self-reflection, which is the real heavy lifting, to make sure that when you step into the conference room, you have your compass, to use a tool from Courageous Conversations, to make sure you are considering all of your perspectives and the perspectives of those around you to make a real robust educational experience for all of our kids, our families, and for our staff as well. So that's what we're doing here at Oswegatchie School. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We'd be more than happy to collaborate because we can always do better. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. And I'll pass it back to Rosie.
Thank you, Joe and Lynn and Allie and Mary. What exciting work that you guys are doing. And the energy, I have to say, just flowed through everything that you were saying and everything that you were talking about. It was so fun to see that. And I can tell just from your energy that momentum is going to keep going and the conversations are going to stay alive. And it's kind of from the ground up. And I just think it's so exciting. So thank you so much for being here and sharing those resources with us. What I'd like to do now is bring back our three principals and do a Q&A for the next, we probably have about 10 minutes. And the first question actually came in first when Sahana was speaking, but I'm going to ask it for all of you. Are you providing bilingual programs for Spanish-speaking students?
So I can start. So we actually do not have a bilingual program at Reed. There are bilingual programs in the district. And what happens is a parent has to agree that they would like their child in that program. We are finding that more and more parents are refusing it. They do not want to have their child go into a bilingual program. They want them to be here at the school and just be immersed in English. We have multiple staff members who speak different languages that are represented by our student body. So we have 2 staff members who speak Haitian. We have multiple staff members who speak Spanish and Portuguese. Some of those staff members are teachers, our office staff. We have 1 secretary who speaks both Spanish and Portuguese, and the other 2 speak Spanish. And we have 1.2 English language learner teachers, ELL teachers. And so we have 1 that's here all 5 days, and then another teacher that's here for 2 days out of the week. And so the ELL teachers actually provide push in and pull out services to our students. And then just all of our print and email is translated into the 4 primary languages that our families speak. So I hope that answers the question.
So the next question I have has to do with parents and guardians. We talked a lot about what you're doing for professional development and bringing your staff along, but what are you doing to help build those relationships and to help work with your parents to bring them along with the DEI work and have everybody on the same page working together?
I can speak to in Westport, we have a number of committees. The most recent being a PTA branch. It's our PTA DEI PTA. So we have a couple of representatives that will meet with each of the schools to make sure, not really to make sure, but to have conversations with them about what's happening K-12, and also sharing with the greater PTA as well as the superintendent and Board of Education. We also have in town Team Westport and a couple of other community groups that meet with the superintendent, sometimes with the schools on a monthly basis. So That's typically how we get information out to the parents, in addition to, of course, correspondence that would come from the school.
Recently, I believe it was the end of last year, our Board of Education, who is operating in virtual meetings, but were publicly broadcast, received equity training over the course of several Board of Ed meetings, which was publicly broadcasted. So all residents were able to see this equity training, also provided by Linda Darcy, who we're working with now, to show that as a district, as a Board of Ed, as a central office, we are all being educated so we can do better. So I thought that was a very bold move to put that out there in the public. So there was no misconception about our intentions and where we were headed. I can certainly do better as a principal, and I'm working weekly to make sure that our communications are better translated. You know, right now, just recently, we started to translate our newsletter to Spanish. So, you know, it is a path that we are still on. But now I'm doing deeper digging into our language representations to make sure that everybody gets the messages, to know what's going on in our school. So a small step to some, but it's a big step for us.
Thank you. And another person wanted to know, what is the biggest challenge that you're facing right now in the work that you're doing to promote inclusive excellence? And what are you going to do about it if you have any ideas?
I'll say our biggest challenge, my biggest challenge is finding time. There are a lot of competing initiatives out there that are all important. And so it's just really making sure that I'm consistent and just trying to figure out how can I devote these sometimes minutes. If it's going to be 45 minutes, we're going to do this for 45 full minutes before we transition over to the next topic. So time is really a huge factor for us.
And for us, it's again, the competing interest. However, you know, as we start to kind of organize the year, it's those competing interests. But now moving forward with the action plan that will be created over the course of the year, tied in with our strategic plan for the district, you know, once we get that in place, I think that's where we'll start to understand where the greatest challenges will come from based on what we want to accomplish as a district.
Yeah, I totally agree with Stafford and Sarhana, and I'll just add one more point, and it's just personally maintaining my compass. I believe in this with all of my heart, and I want to press the fast forward button to make sure we're doing what's right, but that's an impossible thing. So I have to, as an administrator, I have to gauge my approach to this work, both privately and publicly, to make sure that I step with intention, that I don't inadvertently step on a landmine and misspeak or misstep or move too fast, which would then knock down the work that we've already done. We all, I mean, we all know there's critics everywhere, and we're in the public sphere. So we have to know how to present our work in a manner where it comes across accurately. At the same time, while all of our families know we have their back. That's a non-negotiable.
Great, thank you. And I know that you've been doing this work for a while, and so I'm assuming, you can tell me if I'm wrong, that when you're working with people, whether you're having conversations or whatever, there has to have been an aha moment that has changed the way that you think about the work that you're doing or changed the way you approach the DEI work. Have you had any aha moment that really caused you to stop and reflect upon your work and maybe change the way that you're approaching things? And I can see I stumped the panel.
You know, Rosie, I tend to, as I kind of talked about during our presentation, I really do see the dots in so many topics. And I'll say that an aha moment for me was the book club. I haven't done a book club with staff for several years now, and the pandemic really did get in the way of that. And just, priorities changed with the pandemic. But I realized that with the book club that we're just about to start, it doesn't all have to be like mandatory professional learning that we're doing during our Wednesday meetings. It can be something where a group is going to volunteer to read this, and perhaps another group will volunteer to read another something, or to do something different that in some way connects and enhances our learning. But it can be done at a voluntary level. And I'll say that's like a recent aha moment that I had.
When you start doing this work, you just naturally start to apply an equity lens to everything. So every decision for me now has become an aha moment. It just keeps on going, like, oh, well, there I go again. I did not consider that. Aha, I have to change that. Or there's one more spot I can attack. Equity work is for the long haul.
And I think for me, it's just, times have changed, and, my experience growing up, and, what I was taught and ways to look at kind of the system, it's different now. And so that's something that, I have to understand in terms of how to try and move, the building forward. And so I think that, hearing from the panelists today, and the ways in which you're interacting with your faculty, the ways in which you're bringing some information, to the Board of Ed, and in those conversations, those are all helpful, because it's hard to say no one's an expert, but even if you are, let's say, a self-proclaimed expert, every town and situation is so different that what may work in one town, is the exact wrong approach to take in another. So I think that that, on top of being in the time of sound bites and cancel culture, very difficult in terms of being able to grow in front of others. So I think that you also have to try, while you're doing this, to keep, you talk about the safety of the classroom, but also for faculty who are engaging in this. That's the concern, and why this is still continues to be such a third rail for the nation, is, how do we get out there safely, especially with, again, the immediate and kind of final reaction on so many things, that the conversation has kind of been lost. And this is something where we're trying to come up with answers where we really haven't had extensive conversations on the topic. So, well put.
Great. Yes, thank you. So we're just about out of time. I've got one last question for all of you. And that is, we know that every school across Connecticut is somewhere along the continuum of inclusive excellence. So whether they're just beginning the journey or somewhere along the way. So for those administrators, teacher leaders, and school communities that are just getting started with diversity, equity, and inclusion work, what words of advice do you have for them? Where do they start? And for those who are somewhere along the way, when the going gets tough, and it does, and it will for all of us, what metaphor, quote, or words of wisdom do you use to inspire and rejuvenate yourself to move forward and keep the momentum going? So this is a two-part question. Advice for getting started and moving forward, and words or metaphors that inspire you to keep going and doing the difficult work that will help other people as well when the going gets tough for them. And Joe, let's start with you.
Fred Rogers, look for the helpers. Mr. Rogers is always a great go-to, especially at the elementary level, but it translates to all ages. Look for the helpers. And I'm sorry, what was the first part of that question? That was.
How do you get started? Where do you start?
Read,
how do you
read and give yourself a hard look in the mirror? Read, know who you are, where you've made mistakes, and where you want to get better before you open your mouth. That's personal advice to me 2 years ago.
Thank you, Joe. And Sahana.
Yeah, so I'll start with a quote because I love quotes. I went right to my phone because I have in my email signature, like literally the day after Amanda Gorman, who was the inaugural poet for President Biden, I purchased books for the school, and we did this whole celebration because she was so inspirational. So the quote that I have at the end of my email signature says, The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And so that was just after I studied, you know, her entire piece, I found something that I felt resonated with me and resonated with the school. And I just want to piggyback on what Joe talked about in terms of just, it's important to really understand where you have come from, like how were you raised, what are your beliefs, what biases do you hold, and just start reading. There's from fiction to nonfiction, there's so much out there, but you can definitely, you know, start with a search on equity and inclusion and start to read some articles and start to familiarize yourself with what's out there. But have an open mind, like have an open mind. Understand that everything isn't just your way. It's not just the way that you were raised. There's a ton of other ways out there. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. And Stafford.
I guess mine would be a Chinese proverb of a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And, you know, I think so to take that first step is critical, and it's huge. And sometimes you don't quite understand, you know, again, we've been here since 1884, and, you know, Westport certainly known as being a liberal town, very much into arts. And last year was the first ever, like I said, Pride Day here, you know, at Staples. So those steps are important. And the other piece really is to kind of understand the perspective and where you are, and talking to students and seeing, is this best for students? Because, you know, I can say that maybe the way that, you know, and how I was raised in sticks and stones and water off a duck's back may not have been the best way. It may have been successful approach, you know, for me, but maybe it wasn't the best way to go. And now, as I mentioned earlier, about students understanding more about what is seen, and to identify things as being offensive or not being included, much more so than in the, you know, the 80s and 90s. Certainly taking that perspective of, you know, are we doing what's best for children here? And I think getting those personal accounts from your students is a way to keep the wind in your sails as you move forward on this more than 1,000-mile journey. But
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much to all three of you. I could listen to the three of you all day long. I always learn so much from you and listening to your conversation. So a huge thank you to you and the faculty members you brought with you for sharing your work with us today. And I also want to recognize before you go and each of you, and thank you for being members of the CAS Equity Committee and for giving hours of service to CAS, not only to help organize this Education Equity Summit, but also by serving as members on different CAS boards and committees. So if you have any additional questions for any of our three principals, or if you want to get more involved with CAS and or to build your network of administrative colleagues, these are definitely three exemplary school leaders and go-to people for Connecticut. So thank you, Joe, Sahana, and Stafford for everything that you do.